30 seconds. That's how long it took for this place to let me know I wasn't welcome. From the moment I crossed the property line, my chest tightened. Not fear, not anxiety, something else, something alive, something aware of me, something that felt like it had been waiting. Tonight, I'm investigating a house that locals refuse to talk about. A house that sat abandoned for nearly 50 years. A house where every previous owner reported the same thing. Something moves under the floors. Footsteps where no one stands. Breathing in the walls, dragging sounds beneath the boards at night. And last month, a group of urban explorers claimed they recorded a voice whispering from the basement door. Wake up, this is Blackgate House. And beneath this house, something woke up. I walked up the overgrown path, my boots sinking into the damp soil. The house sat ahead like a corpse leaning forward, windows sunken, roof warped, porch sagging under its own weight. Every step toward it felt heavier, as if gravity pulled downward harder the closer I got. The wooden porch creaked when I stepped onto it, not with the normal groan of old wood. This was rhythmic, like something shifting directly beneath me. I whispered into my recorder, "I'm standing on the porch. There's movement under the boards. It's subtle, but intentional." I pressed down with my boot. The wood flexed. A low thump came from underneath. One knock, then another, then silence. Whatever was under there responded to my presence. I took a deep breath, unlocked the front door, and pushed it open. It didn't swing, it inhaled inward slowly as if the house were drawing me into its throat. Inside, the air was cold enough to sting my lungs. Dust drifted through shafts of moonlight cutting across the living room. Paint peeled from the walls like shedding skin. A staircase stood ahead, crooked and leaning to one side. But the sound that hit me first wasn't the wind. It was breathing, slow, deep, coming from somewhere below the floorboards. I whispered, "There's a rhythmic breath under the house, very slow, almost like something asleep or pretending to be." The floor vibrated under my boots as I walked deeper inside. The house didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. I entered the main hallway. Old portraits hung crooked on the walls, faces scratched out, eyes gouged. The wallpaper rippled slightly as if air pushed from behind it. I approached the portrait closest to me. Every face in it was mutilated, except one, the figure in the middle. A tall man, unscratched, expression blank. His eyes seemed to stare directly at me, even in the dim light. I whispered, "This is strange. All other faces are vandalized except the central figure. Almost like whoever did this feared him." A sudden crack echoed from the floor behind me. I spun around. Nothing, but the air shifted heavy, cold, dense. A pressure built in my ears like the atmosphere changed in the entire house. I moved into the dining room. A long table set in the center, covered in dust. At the far end, a single wooden chair faced the doorway. No other chairs, just one. Facing me, waiting. I stepped closer. The chair vibrated just once and slid an inch across the floor without any sound. I froze. The recorder picked up a whisper overlapping my own breath. Sit." The hairs on the back of my neck rose instantly. I whispered back, "I'm not here to sit. I'm here to understand what's happening." The chair stopped moving, but the breathing under the floor grew louder. I moved toward the basement door at the back of the house. It was covered in old scratches, deep, jagged. Some looked human, others much larger. The doorknob was warm, not from heat, from energy. I placed my hand on it. Something inside the basement knocked once powerful, heavy like a fist slamming the other side of the door. I stepped back. The knock repeated, then repeated again, then faster. Building, something was awake. I forced myself to remain still and raise the EVP recorder. "If someone is down there, make yourself known." Silence. Then a whisper slid up through the cracks in the floorboards behind me. "Leave." I spun around. The living room was empty, but the whisper had been inches from my feet, directly from the boards. I crouched down. The wood was cold enough to burn. Another whisper rose through the cracks. "He's not asleep." My breath froze in my chest. Someone or something understood what I was thinking, and it was correcting me. I stood slowly, and backed away toward the main hallway. The air tightened around my throat. My vision dimmed slightly as if the house were constricting the space itself. I whispered, "This place, it's alive. It's reacting to everything I do." A loud crash came from upstairs, not a small one, something heavy like furniture thrown across a room. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The floorboards under me flexed, bowing downward as if something huge pushed up from underneath. The house groaned long and low. A deep vibration traveled through the walls. Like an animal stretching its limbs after a long sleep, I steadied myself. This wasn't just a haunting, this was an awakening. I headed toward the staircase, needing to see what caused the crash. As I stepped onto the first stair, the whole staircase shuddered like something large brushed against it from the other side. I continued upward anyway. Halfway up, the air grew so cold my breath poured out in thick clouds. The shadows at the top of the stairs shifted slowly against the light. Not random, not natural. Like someone standing there, waiting for me to reach them. I took another step. The shadow pulled back, sliding into the hallway. I reached the top and stepped into the second floor corridor. Every door was already open, every room dark, every shadow deeper than it should be. A faint knocking began again, this time from the walls, then from the ceiling, then from under the floor simultaneously. It surrounded me. A 3-beat rhythm, steady, calculated, like a signal. Knock, knock, knock. It repeated faster, louder, deeper. I whispered, "This isn't random. This is communication. This is something sentient." Then the rhythm stopped abruptly. A slow, dragging sound started at the far end of the hallway. It scraped toward me, something long, something heavy, something that didn't walk, but pulled itself. I raised my flashlight. The beam flickered, sputtered, then cut out completely. I was standing in total darkness. A whisper crawled across the hallway, inches from my ear. "It woke up when you entered." My heart pounded. I wasn't alone anymore. Something else was here. And whatever lived beneath this house was rising toward the surface. I stood in the dark hallway, breathing shallow, aware of the house settling around me like a living thing. The knocking, the dragging, the whispers they'd stopped as if taking a collective breath. That silence was more dangerous than any sound. It meant whatever was under the floorboards was listening. I switched my flashlight on again. The beam cut a narrow path through the black. Dust motes spun like tiny planets. The walls felt closer. The portraits lining the corridor seemed to lean in, their painted faces hollow and accusing. I moved door to door, scanning, listening. In the first bedroom I entered, the bed was overturned. Sheets lay twisted on the floor. A child's shoe rested on the pillow as if someone had left in a hurry. The shoe was pristine, too clean for a house left to rot for decades. It looked like it had been placed there recently. I crouched and picked it up. The leather was warm, not warm from weather, warm from energy. A soft metallic clink sounded in my ear like a small chain dropping into a cup. I looked up, nothing. But the recorder on my chest picked up a low-frequency tone riding under the ambient noise, something the human ear doesn't catch, but the equipment does. I whispered into the mic, "You're communicating through everything. The floor, the walls, even small metal." The room pulsed faintly around me, like the heartbeat of the house. I swallowed and left the shoe where I found it, careful not to disturb the pattern of the room more than it already was. I continued down the hall to another bedroom. This one smelled of old lavender and bleach. On the dresser lay a small hand mirror, the glass clouded with age. As I lifted it, a tiny crack spidered across the surface. In the reflection, something moved at the edge of the frame. Nothing in the room itself, only the mirror's world changed. I set the mirror down. The crack began to spread without pressure, like frost across glass. Thin lines crept outward, webbing to the edges. I felt bone-deep unease. I whispered, "Mirrors or borders? This one's failing." Across the hall, a door gaped open to a back room I hadn't expected, an old nursery. The wallpaper was faded, but children's drawings clung to the lower half, crayons still marking the pages. On a small shelf, a wooden rattle sat as if waiting to be used. It trembled with an invisible hand, and then stopped. I stepped closer. The rattle began to turn slowly, as if someone unseen toyed with it. The sound it made was a slow, hollow rattle timed to the house's pulse. I spoke out loud to whatever was here. If you want us to know you're awake, you've made it very obvious. The rattle stilled. A quiet voice, compressed and layered as if multiple tones spoke at once, slid under the floor and up through the boards. Hungry. The word wasn't a human whisper. It wasn't even a single tone. It was many voices at once, harmonizing into one meaning. I felt the hair on my arms rise. I knew then this thing didn't only move sound, it manipulated perception. It arranged the environment to shape memory and feeling. It fed on attention and left hunger when attention moved away. I left the nursery and found the master suite at the end of the hall. The door looked like it had been forced inwards at some point. Scratches ringed the frame. Inside, the bed was intact. A heavy trunk sat at the foot, its lock rusted but not corroded away. Someone had kept the lock functional. On the trunk, elaborate carvings were etched, pentagrams interlaced with concentric circles, lines intersecting to build a diagram of containment. The engravings were old, but someone had polished the grooves recently. I ran my finger along one symbol. It warmed under my skin. The air hummed. This was designed to keep something beneath the house, I said quietly. Not keep it out, but keep it imprisoned. A soft scraping sound came from below my feet. I realized the noise traveled up the wood and into my bones. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened. The sound was deliberate, like someone dragging a rope, like chains against stone. It built tempo, then faded. I opened the trunk. Inside lay a bundle of papers wrapped in oilcloth. I unfolded an old ledger. The handwriting inside was precise, Alistair Blackgate's, or someone who'd kept records for him. Page after page described rituals, sigils, prayers, and an entry marked in capital letters. Do not remove. Below that, in trembling ink, an addendum. The thing beneath remembers names. It learns faces. It takes form from fear. I felt cold all the way through. If this ledger was genuine, Blackgate had known more than anyone reported. He wasn't merely eccentric. He'd been fighting desperately against whatever slept under the house. I slipped the ledger into my bag. A sudden crash from below startled me. Something heavy had been dropped on the basement floor. The house answered with a low, keening sound, old wood protesting, then falling into silence. I descended the stairs. The basement door protested on its hinges. The smell hit me first. Earth, iron, old rot, and something sweeter like decayed flowers. My breath caught. The air here was thicker, damp, and cold, like the lungs of the earth. There were signs of people, recent footprints in dust, a cigarette butt, a plastic bottle. Someone had been here not long ago. But there was also something else. Concentric markings on the concrete floor, scraped deep into the surface. The pattern was a containment circle, broken through in several places. At one corner of the room, a crude altar had been built. Stones were stacked. A rusted ring lay at its center, wax dripped from long-dead candles. On the wall behind the altar, someone had written words that left me feeling sick. We awake the beneath. It remembers our names. I set my gear down and raised a thermal camera. The readout showed a cold void around the altar, a hole in the thermal field. Not just cold, but a negative presence, an absence of heat that registered as less than ambient. I placed an EVP recorder on the altar and sat with it. I waited. The house seemed to circumscribe the moment, focusing energy on that altar like a lens. Minutes stretched. The recorder picked up faint, low-frequency thumps, the kind of sound you feel in your chest rather than hear. I asked aloud, clear and deliberate. What woke you? The device carried the question into the stillness. For a beat, nothing happened. Then a sound rose from below, not through the air, but through bone and wood. A vibration like someone striking stone from a great distance. It was rhythmic, increasing in tempo. Then, through the recorder, a voice came not in my ears, but through the device's speaker with a gravelly timbre as if the house had used the machine as a conduit. We were always beneath. The voice dropped into silence, and then another, far behind that one, layered it. We remember the touch of feet. We remember the breath. I reviewed the recording on my camera. The waveform showed multiple overlap signals, voices chopped into shards, recombined, intelligent, purposeful. I felt watched from every angle. My skin crawled with the realization that the thing below the house had not only been woken by human curiosity, but fed by it. My presence had been a meal. This thing used attention as fuel. If that's true, then every person who had trespassed, every child's game, and every voyeur at this house had nourished it. I zipped the ledger into my jacket and rose. A low grinding began under the foundation. The concrete vibrated. Dust fell in a slow cascade. The containment circle on the floor trembled, and a hairline crack widened to a fist-sized gap. Something was pushing through. I backed toward the stairs and shouted for my team. No reply. My radio was dead. No pings, no static. The house had cut off communication. I moved up the stairs as fast as I dared. The house seemed intent on keeping me below, on breaking the threshold between the sleeping thing and the world above. Halfway up, a hand brushed my shoulder cold and damp. I spun, flashlight slicing the black. Nothing, only shadow. At the top of the stairs, the hallway light glowed faintly. The portrait swiveled slightly, eyes meeting mine. I whispered to myself, steadying my breath. They woke something, and now it wants out. The house answered with a sound that came not from below or above, but behind the walls, teeth-clicking static, like a chorus of voices preparing to speak all at once. I tightened my grip on the ledger and moved down the hall. The sealed door at the end of the corridor loomed like a promise and a threat. The lock no longer looked rusted. It looked new, polished by recent hands. The house had changed tonight, and whatever had been roused beneath the floorboards was testing the boundary. It pushed. I braced. I stopped at the foot of the hallway and stared at that sealed door. The lock gleamed like it had been oiled within the last few days. Someone had been here. Someone had been trying to open it or keep it shut. The two possibilities were the same, and neither was good. My recorder was warm in my hand. The ledger weighed heavy in my jacket. Alistair's handwriting still fresh in my mind. It remembers names. It learns faces. The words echoed in the hollow of my skull. I paced slowly toward the door, careful not to provoke whatever watched from within the walls. Every step felt like moving through syrup. The house pressed in. The air was thick, saturated with the smell of iron and old rot. My flashlight cut a narrow cone through the dark, illuminating scratches on the floor that led to the threshold marks not made by feet, but by something dragging. I crouched and traced one gouge. It was deep, furrowed into the wood like a claw had carved it. I stood and placed my palm on the door. The vibration rose immediately, low and ancient, as if something below pressed its hand against the other side in sympathy. The house answered with a low keening that went straight into my chest. I spoke quietly. I'm not here to let you out. I'm here to find out why you woke. Silence. Then a breath, not through the air, but through the foundation. Slow, labored, like a throat trying to form a word. From somewhere under the floor, a sound like chains sliding rang out. The same scraping I'd heard earlier, only closer now, as if the thing beneath had moved toward the seam, where it could feel daylight seeping down. I stepped backward. The hallway lights flickered. Then I heard it, a child's voice, tiny and clear, saying my name. Not shouted, not urgent. Just my name, folded into the darkness like a question. Zek. My pulse spiked. I turned slowly, but the corridor was empty. The voice came again, slightly different, layered with something older, deeper. The house was copying. It had taken a memory and made it a lure. Somewhere in me I recognized the tactic. Lure with familiarity, mimic comfort, then take. I moved to the attic door at the end of the hall. The attic had been a place of storage, old trunks, broken furniture, an unused cradle. In the ledger, there were entries about the attic, observations, failed rituals, last attempts to pry the thing down below into less destructive slumber. I opened the attic door. A cold breath washed down the stairs. The attic was a black bowl of old memories. My flashlight beam found a circle burned into the floorboards, scorched clean down to raw wood. Symbols ringed at words and scripts older than the house. Someone had tried to bind this thing not just to the basement, but to the very bones of the building. At the center of the circle lay a doll, not a toy doll. A crudely made thing, cloth, button, eyes, stitched mouth. It radiated a quiet wrongness. I felt my skin tighten. I crouched. The doll's button eyes reflected the light like two dead moons. I picked it up. It was barely warm. A sound from below rolled up through the floorboards, slow and hungry. The ledger's pages rifled in my jacket as if turned by an invisible hand. The attic smelled of burned sugar and pipe tobacco. I set the doll back exactly where I found it. Someone had placed the doll in that circle, intentionally. To feed, to comfort, to bait. I moved back down to the hallway. The house answered with a single heavy thud below, like something large settling into place. My radio crackled. For a second, life returned. A voice, a single word, faint and distorted Naomi checking in. Then static, then nothing. The house cut it off. The isolation settled back in. I knew I had to document evidence, but I also knew pushing this thing would be dangerous. The ledger suggested containment, ritual, and respect. The last word scratched by Alistair read like a prayer and a warning. Do not feed it with fear. Do not give it names unless you are prepared to lose them. I read those lines and understood the gravity. This thing curated memory. It took identity. It mimicked voices and faces to erode that person into itself until it owned the name. If it had been waking for months, it had learned enough to be clever. If the explorer's whisper, "Wake up," had been heard, then its hunger now included outsiders like me. I set up a series of devices, audio recorders layered across the main rooms, a thermal camera focused on the basement hatch, and an EMF rig in the hall. I placed small trigger objects in several rooms, an old rattle in the nursery, the child's shoe in the bedroom, the journal on the desk. Each item was bait and sensor both. The first hour passed with crackles and thumps. The devices recorded low-frequency rumbles that translated to the sensation of standing near a distant drum. Footstep anomalies showed up on the audio patterns that matched neither human gait nor rodent scamperings. Thermal imaging captured negative spaces. The basement registered as colder than anything else in the house, a hole colder than the night outside. Then the house changed pace. The knocking sequence returned, but it was faster, deliberate, a code. Knock, 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 long pause, repeat. It echoed through beams and pipes, synchronized like some mechanism pulling gears, and the EMF spiked violently, levels far beyond normal paranormal bucket readings. The needle slammed into red as if the house had turned a circuit on. At that exact moment, a voice streamed into the recorder, algebraic, broken into syllables, then formed words. I remember. Not my name this time. A name from the ledger, someone who had once lived here. The voice layered the name with the tone of a child and the depth of an old man. It was mimicry perfected into a weapon. A cold pressure slammed into the room, my camera lenses fogged from the sudden change, then cleared to show motion under the floor. The thermal readout spiked. Something huge was moving beneath the foundation, a mass shifting across cold stone. I grabbed the EMF reader. The field shot past anything I'd seen. Lights on the rig flashed like a warning. My hand shook. I pressed the recorder to my mouth and spoke straight into it. You will not take names tonight. You will not use them against people who aren't here. The response was immediate. The house went silent. Total silence. No creak, no whisper, no movement. The kind of silence that presses on your eardrums. Then a single sound, the chair in the dining room scraping across the floor. Slowly, 100 feet away, but audible as if it was right beside me. It eased with meticulous care to the threshold of the sealed door. The handle shifted. The lock rattled. Whatever waited behind that door no longer needed to learn how to mimic a voice. It was testing the barrier itself. I moved faster than I thought I could. Camera on my shoulder, recorder in hand. I sprinted down the hallway toward the dining room, feet pounding through the house like a challenge. The air was thick, making each breath a task. I reached the door. The chair sat before it, exactly where the sound had predicted. The chair's woodwork glistened as if polished. No dust. The room had been staged. The chair suddenly tipped. It fell backward. The legs hit the floor with a dull thud. Nothing else moved. Then the sealed door creaked. A hairline fracture ran along the frame, one that had not been there moments before. The lock twisted slowly of its own accord. A whisper threaded through the crack, less a voice than a concept rendered audible. Open. My chest tightened. This wasn't a request. It was an instruction to fate. If the thing got through, it would not simply manifest. It would take form from memory, from names, from fear. It would become the person you most protected, and in taking that shape, it would destroy identity itself. I had two choices: force the door closed with whatever ritualic residue the ledger suggested, or leave, pull my team out and report it. But leaving risked letting it learn more from our departure, watching our faces as it formed new strategies. I didn't have the luxury of deciding calmly. I needed to act. I turned and ran for the study where the ledger had been, the ledger, the rituals, the words that might place this thing back into quiet. The house watched. It waited. The sealed door trembled. The foundation sighed as something beneath pushed harder. Time distorted. Every second stretched thin like taffy. I gathered the pages. The ink shone slightly under my lamp. I knew what I had to do, what Alistair had tried, and how desperately he had failed. But failure in the past didn't mean the ritual couldn't be completed tonight. If the thing under the floorboards woke fully, it would not be satisfied with one name, one house, or one city. It would not simply take a memory. It would reach outward, consuming identity until nothing was left. I stepped back into the hall, ledger clutched in my hand, and walked toward the sealed door. The house screamed, not with sound, but with intent. I spoke the first line from memory, steady and clear, as the house closed in on me. I steadied my breath and began to speak the first line from the ledger. The words felt old in my mouth, heavy with history and warning. I wasn't reciting them as a charm or a threat. I was reciting them as a promise to hold something back that had no business walking the world. The house answered with a sound like wind trapped in a pipe. The sealed door shuddered. The foundation thrummed under my feet. For a moment, I thought the pressure would split me in two. I kept going one line, then the next, my voice steady, though my hands weren't. The words on the pages were precise. The ink curled in the ledger like a roadmap for containment. I spoke as if the house itself could hear the cadence and be soothed by it. Halfway through the passage, the temperature dropped so fast my breath hitched. My voice fogged the page and the letters seemed to swim. The thing below responded by scraping along the rotten beams, searching the seams for weakness. The knock pattern changed, blunt, frantic. It wanted a gap, it wanted the smallest opening. I slammed the ledger shut and pressed my palm flat against the sealed wood, feeling the vibration of something pounding from the other side. The words had purchased some way, somehow they were weakening the thing's connection to the surface. The lock rattled, smoke wafted through a hairline crack in the frame, and the smell of earth filled my nose. The ledger recommended one last act, a naming, not to give it power, but to bind it to a place and time. Alistair's note warned that names are traps. Use them carelessly, and you bleed them away from the living. Use them precisely, and you tether the thing to a threshold. I had to choose the name carefully, one that would not feed it, that would not become an identity it could assume. I whispered a name that meant nothing to me, nothing to the house, nothing to the thing beneath. A nonsense word formed from the letters in the ledger. A syllable meant as a seal, not as recognition. I said it once, twice, 3 times. The house convulsed. A sound like an animal dying rolled through the rafters and then stopped. For a heartbeat, the world quieted as if the house were holding its breath along with me. The sealed door went still. The vibrations slowed. Then came a new sound, a voice layered, many rising out of the gap where the smoke curled. It spoke the nonsense syllable back to me, but elongated, hollowed, filled with a hunger that made the hair on my arms stand on end. It sang, stretching the syllable into a cave of longing. It was trying to make my word its own. I slammed the ledger onto the floor and placed my body against the door, pushing with everything I had. The house bucked around me. The pressure lifted for the smallest instant, like a tide pulling back before a larger wave. In that breath, I shoved the ledger into the crack and hammered my shoulder into the frame until my ribs burned. Something beneath screamed without sound. The house roared, paint flaked, plaster cracked, and a window shattered somewhere in the back rooms. The ledger's pages unfurled in the wind of the disturbance, scattering words of warning like dry leaves. I remembered what Alistair wrote about fear. Feeding it meant giving it shape. Control your fear and you make it hungry for less. I forced my panic into a single focus, finish the ritual, protect the ledger. Keep the name from being turned into history. I took a step back and found a length of iron pipe from the collapsed banister. The metal was heavy and cold. I wedged it under the door, using it as a brace. The house pushed, the door bowed. The pipe groaned. For a terrifying second, I imagined the thing would push the door through and smother me with whatever it was. Then the pressure eased. An unseen force seemed to draw breath and recede like tide water. The knocking slowed, then became a dull heartbeat. The smoke in the crack thinned and retreated into the basement where it hovered like a black cloud. The sound layered voices, hungry and whispering, folded inward. I stayed braced against the frame, shaking, sweat cold on my back, ledger clutched to my chest. Minutes passed and the house settled as if it had returned to sleep. The heavy thumb of movement under the foundation subsided into slow, cautious shifting. The broken lock dropped silent. The chair legs stopped scratching at the threshold. I pulled my recorder up and played back the last few minutes of audio. The files showed overlapping voices, pitches, and tones stacked like a chorus. The word I'd chosen repeated, but each iteration decayed until it was a guttering note. The house had tried to make my syllable into a name it could wear. It failed. A quiet tapped my shoulder. Not from the house, from behind me. I turned slowly. Naomi stood in the doorway, her face pale and wet. She had that look the one people get when they almost accept that some part of their life is gone, shaken loose by some truth. Elias hovered beside her, camera hanging useless by his side. He looked as if the events had aged him. "You okay?" Naomi asked, voice small. I laughed, a short, broken sound. "I'm alive. That's the plan." She pointed behind me toward the living room. The single chair sat where it had been. The portrait of the man with the unscratched face had a thin crack across the painted eye. The crack was new. It cut through the stare and made the face absurd, human in its fracture. "We have to leave this ledger," Naomi said. "We can't take it out. It's a containment map. Remove it, and you might unbind what you've just sealed." She was right. The pages were not evidence to haul back like trophies. They were a tool and a warning. I slid the ledger under the iron brace where it would stay pressed against the crack, a weight and a bookmark, something to keep the ritual words present in the room. We gathered our gear in a slow, mechanical motion, not trusting ourselves to move faster. The house hummed around us like a living lung, settling again into its ancient rhythm. The attic door closed on its own as if to seal the top of the house. The basement seemed content with its boundary. For now, we stepped outside into the gray morning. The air felt clearer, thinner by contrast. My bones still ached from holding the brace, from pushing back against a force that had been patient for too long. The field recorder clutched in my hand was full of proof voices layered into patterns, knocks into codes, thermal negatives where nothing should be. But the ledger stayed behind, under the pipe, a sleeping thing's history. We walked the property to the gate together, boots stepping over the same damp dirt I'd pressed into the night before. The house watched us all the way down the path. From the porch, its silhouette looked smaller somehow, less like a sentinel and more like a wound. At the gate, I turned and looked back. The windows were dark. The broken glass glimmered. The front door was shut. The air was still. For the first time since I'd arrived, I didn't feel the pressure pressing at my chest. "It's contained again," Naomi said quietly, "for now." I nodded. "We woke it," I said. "But we kept it from stepping out. It learned, though. It learned from the attention we gave it. That's the final lesson." She shivered. "So what now?" I thought about the ledger lying under the brace like a secret sleeping thing. I thought about every voice we had recorded, every knock, every breath under the floor. I thought about the people who came before Alistair, the ledger writer who had tried, failed, and tried again. "We watch," I said. "We document. We warn. We don't feed it." I turned and walked away from Blackgate House. The path behind me seemed longer than when I'd come. The fog closed a little as I moved, folding the house back into the earth. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, a slow, patient breathing continued. Not a sleeping breath anymore, something that listened, learned, and waited. We left the ledger to guard the threshold. We left the name beneath the door. We left the house to its ancient hunger, knowing we had not destroyed what lived there. We had only held it at bay. And that knowledge sits heavy with me now, heavier than any evidence I've ever collected. Beneath that house, something woke up. It did not go back to sleep. It only stopped knocking until the next curious ear opens a door.